This is the Strut website at strut.so. Some of the things I point out, I should say up top, won't be the same at different viewports. So keep those in mind if you go and look at this website yourself, and some of the things I point out are different. So the first thing that immediately hits me, and probably you as well, is this product screenshot. It's absolutely massive. Takes up most of the screen horizontally, most of the screen vertically in this initial viewport. That's quite bold. You don't often see this taking up so much space. Usually this title, which you can see here in the bottom left, would be front and center. But clearly Strut wants to, well, strut their stuff and show the product, hopefully give you a sense of how it works. I think that's partly because now a lot of us are used to these sorts of Kanban style, move things between statuses layouts. Hopefully this gives you a very quick sense of how the product works. They're also showing off this messaging system on the right. There's quite a lot going on here. If you had it much smaller, maybe you wouldn't be able to show it off as much. I'm going to start at the top here. You've got this main navigation. It gets its own space above the screenshot. One thing I like is that as you scroll, it sits above the screenshot. I think this screenshot is the first thing that will drag your attention in when you load the page. As you scroll, I think this light background essentially highlights the navigation as you scroll. I think that draws your attention up there. Suddenly there's a blank space. It's taken up by something. It's not blank anymore. I think that's a nice subtle way to sort of bring your attention inwards. But for that reason, I find it interesting that the Strut logo is not in this space created by the main navigation, because that's where you'd normally expect it. It's within the box, let's say, created, the sort of implicit box created by the screenshot. And they've done the same thing with the text down here. So they're really anchoring everything around this screenshot, which is quite nice. Speaking of the text down here, you can see the main title overlaps the screenshot. This works quite well because in the screenshot itself, you've got this sort of empty space that the text overlaps with. You can't really do this if the content or the screenshot here is dynamic. If this might be more visually busy behind this text, suddenly it works less well. But because this is relatively empty, you can have text overlapping it, and it's not going to cause too many visual issues. And it's quite a nice sort of connection between the title and the screenshot this way. So yeah, as I mentioned right at the start, you've got the main title, the subtitle, and the call to action all down here, and they're quite muted compared to the giant screenshot. So this is a very interesting direction to take a hero section. Speaking of muted, even the get started, which is normally sort of very obviously a button, here it's just underlined text. And I assume that's related to the fact that it's a writing tool. You know, you wouldn't, for example, draw a button shape if you're writing something, but you might write something and then underline it to emphasize it. And so that's quite a nice way to tie it back to the whole writing concept. One thing I want to point out about the logo, as I scroll down, you can see it slowly shifts. And actually they have this channel on the left, the margin, same on the right, but they always keep this logo in the channel on the left. So that's quite a nice use of essentially empty space, which would just be left there to give a bit more space for the contents of the website to breathe, so they don't push up against the edges. Here they're using it to hold the logo as you scroll. That's quite nice. So I'm not the biggest fan of animations as you scroll on websites. I do quite like this in this case. First of all, because the animation is very fast, the text is sort of streaming in very quickly. Also, the text is already there, and it's essentially being filled out, so it's going from grey to black. I much prefer that, where you can actually read the text if you really want to before it animates in, than cases where you can't see the text at all and it animates in. That's sort of my least favourite approach. But here I think it works quite well, first of all because it's fast, like I say. Second of all, because the text being added in, it speaks to this sort of AI concept. It reminds us of this AI concept because of the streaming text you get in ChatGPT. But also because adding words bit by bit is how you write. So it fits this writing concept that the app is for. I also like these double lines. I haven't looked into this. I think double rules are a traditional divider style in sort of typography and printing and everything. I haven't double checked that, but I wanted to point it out in case it was a clever use of traditional writing visual styles, and I wanted to compliment them on that. If not, it's just a nice sort of visual interest way to make your dividers slightly more interesting than a single rule. I quite like these darker containers, and I've actually only just noticed this paper-like texture in the background. I suppose that's a good example of something that's subtle enough that you don't really notice it, but you do feel it when you load the website. It's got more warmth, more depth, more visual interest than just a plain background is, but I hadn't even noticed it until this point. And I noticed it because these darker containers that the product videos are in are highlighting that texture and making it even warmer, even more visible. So that's quite a nice way, again, to reference this sort of paper concept and writing in general. It is a shame about these, I've run into this problem myself, it's a shame about these dark corners where you take a screenshot with square corners, but the application window has rounded corners. Often you catch a different color in these corners, and so that shows up. That is a shame, and it would be nice to sort of match the container border radius to that, and then hide the content behind it so that you get these nice clean rounded corners. I quite like this thicker divider under the title, sort of start the list. I also quite like this way of giving you more information if you want it, but not necessarily forcing it on you. So that keeps it visually simple, and the first one was open by default. That shows you that you can click on the other ones if you want to learn more about them. But if not, it's going to stay visually simple, which is a good approach. So this is a very big sort of container grid layout. They've really gone bold with their product screenshots and videos where they show you as much of the product as you can. And I'm not particularly surprised by that, because I think that people who use tools like this to write are really into their tools. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that the tools that writers use, that they feel very strongly about them. And so it doesn't surprise me that they're showing so much of the tool with such big screenshots. So it's the same pattern again, they just reversed it. I quite like this. So this is a stamp effect, and I like that because, again, it calls back to this sort of old-fashioned printing visual style, where someone might put a rubber stamp on the ink block and then put it on the page to mark something. So this is calling back to sort of older times in terms of printing and writing, but using it to promote this modern writing platform. So that's quite nice. Okay, so one thing I want to scroll up again. You can see that this black background in the next section starts full width. As you scroll down, it pulls in to the margin, and you can see it's getting narrower. And the focus of this section is focus, right? So I quite like this as a very subtle animation. It doesn't affect the content, but as a very subtle animation that says we're pulling you in, and that represents that focus idea, which sort of lines up with the idea of maybe you zoom in on something, you're basically bringing the left and right edges, you're magnifying it, but you're bringing the left and right edges in on something to put all of the attention on it. And so that's happening here as well. I quite like that because of the focus, but also the black background really helps you to focus because it's a lot of visual weight, right? It's a sudden shift in the background color. Both of these things nicely and subtly represent this idea of focus. That also means that these highlight colors, which were in here, but I don't think they've used any color in sort of the main content until now, apart from the sign up button. So all of this text, this is all just black and, well, not white, but black and beige. And all of the color has been in these screenshots. But now that they've switched to a darker color, For the background, these highlight colors really stand out a lot more. So you can see here with the Rachel and here with the bold. They stand out a lot more, and it's quite an effective use of color. I also like, you've got this straight edge at the top, and so this is pulling in. This just feels like a standard container. Once you get to the bottom, you realize it also represents paper. So they didn't do it with the paper texture, or there might be one applied and you just can't see it very well. Instead, they've got this torn off perforation effect at the bottom. And up here at the top, you didn't realize that, but that still fits this concept of paper where you might have straight edges on a piece of paper, but you tear it off at the bottom. So it starts with a straight edge, and then there's perforations at the bottom of this page, perforations at the start of the next page, and so on. So this feels like it fits the concept well, but it also represents that paper concept well. And it feels like a nice way to transition from the dark background container section to the next section. You're not just having another straight line, you're saying, oh, there was more of this, but it was torn off, and so back to the sort of lighter parts of the website. Again, nice use of this double divider here. It's at the top and bottom of this container grid. And I quite like that because it adds depth in a place where you might expect to see shadows. Instead, you're seeing this double line, whereas the left and right, the vertical lines are single. So this adds some nice depth, but also some start and end, a sense of the start and end of the container. Whereas these single lines don't represent the start and end of the container, apart from on the left and right edges. So that's another nice way to essentially transition into a different section, but it almost feels like a drop shadow, although a solid one, and that adds some depth to the container grid. And then finally, they're sort of reinforcing some of those motifs where you've got the perforated edges here on what is now a stamp, and that reminds you of this perforated edge here. This stamp was initially up here, and then this, I suppose this just references the double dividers, or they wanted an extra one, but I don't think we've seen that before.